Just new setup, new place. How's that? It's a little bright in the background, but I think I like the ambiance. So we'll go ahead and leave it like this. How's that, everybody? Okay. One last thing. I know it's not a margarita glass, but the folks that I'm with made me a margarita. I haven't had one of these in a long, long time. So I'm going to be sipping on this as we visit, and I hope that's okay with everybody. It's a little breezy where I am. I hope you don't have too much interference with the breeze, but I've tried to set up outside so you can see some of the landscaping here and kind of relax with it a little bit. Good evening, everyone, as you come in. Hi, Roosevelt. How you doing? So anyway, like I said, I'm visiting with some friends. We're doing a little bit of work on some things, and I told them, I said, I really owe some folks. Good, 5 by 5, great. Thanks, missing. Like I said, you might get a little breeze in here because it is breezy. Okay. Uh, but anyway, I told them I really should do this because I promised I would, and so here we are. And very pretty place. All kinds of floral around here, flora and landscaping that's really pretty. The weather is just perfect. It's about 72 degrees, like I say, with a slight breeze. So, hi Australia. What's that, Jude from what was that? Jude of Depato, I guess is what it is. Anyway, hello everyone as you come in again, and so I promised you I was going to do a little interaction. So I'm not going to do a lot of talking today except trying to answer questions. Of course, I won't be able to answer all of them. A lot of things going on, as you all know. The medical, so-called medical officials have been caught in so many things, and yet, uh, unfortunately, the people with a lot of sway are still keeping that information from the public at large. But all we can do is what we can do and pray that those who need to hear the message and are ready to hear it will. So that's all I'll say about that. Terrible things going on over in Israel area. I won't get into that right now either. And we could go on and on. Uh, Lies and distortions and disinformation everywhere. So that's part of the test, though, is to see if we can overcome those things. And as I talked about in my video the other day, have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Okay, all right. Like I say, it's going to be kind of windy out here. Hopefully, it's not too bad. Another pastor was arrested today. It doesn't surprise me. That government in Canada has turned out to be a Nazi regime, and that shouldn't surprise anyone because a lot of them were involved in that crap anyway from many, many years ago. Okay, well, let's see. Again, I'll have to be careful about how I answer some of the questions on here tonight. But let's go ahead and go. I promised I'd do a little Q&A, so let's do that. Let me see what we've got here. Yes, American Defender, there are some things about that, and there's more information coming out. And I don't know if that's more disinformation to divide people because they really like to do things that divide people, but it's certainly something that some of the professional uh, folks who deal with everybody's health, they are saying that there's a problem. Yes, medical. I know about the nanoparticles as well. American Defender. I've heard about that. I've seen it. Um, yeah, I think that's a good question, Walter. Can you tell us more about your experiences knowing Dr. Eisenman? I'm into James, the brother of Jesus. Dr. Eisenman, as I have said, he's quite old now. He's in his mid 80s. I talked to him on the phone about a week ago, and he's had some tragedies in his life. I think I didn't press on those, but he's a very honest man. If you watch his videos on YouTube, which some people have talked about, you can see he does have some up there. you'll see that he's kind of eccentric in a way, like I said, but it's because he's just so knowledgeable. What a lot of people don't know about him is that he has a degree in physics. Okay, he started out in physics, and then he went into history and archaeology, and so that was his real love, and that's what he's been doing basically for 40 years now, or more. Uh, and like I said, he's a man who doesn't have any sacred cows he's trying to protect. He is Jewish, but he talks as honestly about how bad the Talmud is in some ways, especially its interpretation and explanations of first century events, as he does the way early Christianity, the truth about that has been covered up and distorted. So he comes from both sides, but he's very open-minded. He doesn't want to attack faith. He just says, if you want your faith, you've got it, do it. But here's the history, so you decide. So that's a very intelligent way to handle it. He's certainly more um, adept at not causing trouble than I am. So, but yeah, very knowledgeable. If you get his books and you read them, you'll see how intricate they are, and that's one reason why I decided to come on and about those books and his studies and his professional insights, because the books are pretty heavy. But if you can get into those, dedicate yourselves to understanding, and I understand about the repetition, as I've said before, some of the redundancy, but it's because the things that he is presenting, he's trying to give you all the different angles and substance. So I have beyond worlds of respect for Professor Robert Eisenman, and he sacrificed himself in order to get you the Dead Sea Scrolls. He did that, and it was a selfless sacrifice on his part. Fortunately, it worked out okay. But he was attacked from all sides by people who wanted to keep the status quo and the sacred cows in place. But more and more is coming out. As a matter of fact, at my friend's house here, we watched a thing on the History Channel about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's a later production. I think it was probably made within the last 2 years or so. But it did catch up on some of the information that Eisenman had been trying to explain, that a lot of the Dead Sea Scrolls were written right around the first century, certainly in Jesus' time forward. They didn't talk about James, but they did talk about the Essenes. So in other words, the evidence is starting to come out and be undeniable. So Robert Eisenman is a man of integrity, honor, and meticulous research. Okay, hopefully that answers your question, Walter. Kelly Ward, trust the plan. Kelly Ward, you're not that Republican from Arizona, are you, Kelly? That's a joke. You know I don't do that. The Torah, let's see, Darlene Hendrickson. The Torah is how we are to live. If you understand what really happened in the first century, and if you want to belong to the group that Jesus and James basically started, yes, you have to be Torah observant, despite what Paul said, and I explained that to you the other day, and that's a very unpopular position. Uh, most Christians don't want to hear about that, and I understand it. I do. I don't know what to say about it. There are people, though, who felt so strongly about it that they were willing to die for it in the first century, which is what Jesus did, what James did, what Judas did. Judas Iscariot, he was not the betrayer that has been. As a matter of fact, he was actually beheaded by the Romans for his insurrection activities, and Josephus was apparently privy to some of that. So the information in the New Testament is good as far as learning morals for the most part, understanding how to treat people, but there are underlying themes in the New Testament that if you're not aware of what's happening and how it's being framed, it leads you down a path where you misunderstand what the original message was. And that was a purposeful activity, and Paul engaged in it as well as some others. Anyway, that's just kind of the basic idea. But I hasten to add that the Torah was something to Israel. It wasn't to the whole world, and that's why they were supposed to be so insistent on following its rules. Uh, However, it was very clear in their earlier writings, both in the Old Testament and even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that even though the Dead Sea Scrolls were very much more xenophobic, that they did believe that all of mankind would receive a yesha, a salvation of some sort, and apparently, as I've explained in one of my videos, they even had the concept of a resurrection. So while they insisted that those who joined them do Torah, they did not say that the entire world needed to do it. It was just those that were trying to join them. And when Paul did that and then betrayed them, that was a serious offense on Paul's part, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah, I know. Ahal, yeah, I know. Linwood, I don't pay much attention to him. Sidney Powell's gone. So, what were Jesus' views on animal sacrifice? Yeah, that's a touchy subject, Roosevelt. That's a good one that you brought up. Based upon what James was saying, let's see if I can explain this. Isaiah talks about it. Isaiah says, I've had enough of your sacrifices and the blood of bullocks and of lambs. What I want is a change of heart in you. That's what I want. That's the sacrifice. Obedience is better than sacrifice. And so the sacrificial things were put into place. First of all, of course, the firstlings of the flock were a semblance, a reminder that there would be this righteous person, the Son of God, if you would. They wouldn't refer to it that way in the modern vernacular that we do, but who would be that lamb, and that was the symbol of that. Of course, Abraham's sacrifice that was stopped of his son Isaac, and then a bullock was found in the bushes. They would have, but frankly, the Torah was still in effect at that point in time, and they probably would have. For instance, they talked about the Passover meal. And again, there's some problems with the New Testament chronology and the storyline, but basically there would have been the animal sacrifices would have been continued, and that was one of the reasons why James would have brought up not sacrificing to idols, not eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols. But if the idea was to get the community to the point where they were a mobile holy of holies, and so the sacrifices would have been in preparation to that. So they would have still been doing them. And when the opposition high priests who were with James took over the temple for a short period of time, they reinstituted those sacrifices. So I would suspect that Jesus would have approved of that. Hopefully that will answer your question. Oh, Woody Hayes, what is the detail of the picture on the Twitter? Yeah, those are a group of NATO officers, including myself, from several countries. We were involved in doing some things in Eastern Europe, and so we were flying around in a Soviet, not then, a Russian transport plane, because that's kind of how we did things. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about it, but there were two of us, two American officers, a Turkish officer, a Danish officer, a Dutch officer, and I think we had a Spanish officer, and we were all considered terrorism experts. Okay, and so we were instrumental in bringing in Bulgaria into NATO. Okay, so that's what that was about. Kind of beating around the bush, but that's basically what it was. So that picture was taken, I believe it was taken in let Let me think now where we had landed when that picture was taken. I think that picture was actually taken in Macedonia, if I remember, part of the breakup of Yugoslavia as we were headed east. Now, I could be mistaken about that. It could have been taken in Sofia, Bulgaria, but somewhere around there. Okay, hopefully that will answer your questions. You're welcome, Roosevelt. You're welcome, Rage Against the Machine. Oh, I look great in blue. Blue's my color. Blue and green are my colors, and I know that. But I didn't plan it for that tonight. It's just because this is a very lightweight thing, and it kind of sheds, perspiration pretty easy. You're welcome, Rashawn. By the way, Rashawn, did you know that that's the name of one of my characters in my book, Rashawn? Did you know that? If you go look at the Crimson Thread, and you can get that if you go in my playlist here and go to Reading of the Crimson Thread and go to the description box for the whole playlist, you'll see a link there so that you can go to the website and get the book, and you'll find out the person by the name of Rashawn. It's a son of a very close friend of Joseph of Arimathea. Well, I'm glad you did that, Oscar. That you bought the James, the Brother of Jesus. I'm going to buy the book next. Let's see what is it. And I bought James, and you're going to buy probably New Testament Code. Good. And there's also one uh, James, the Brother of Jesus, and the Early Christians, or maybe it's the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Early Christians. That's a really good one too because you get some translations, Eisenman's own translations of some of the really important Dead Sea Scrolls, primarily the Damascus document, the Community Rule, which is also known as the Manual of Discipline, the Habakkuk Pesher, the War Scroll, and I always forget the other one, but there's another one in there, and they're very good translations for the details that were available. Of course, the scrolls had to be put together like jigsaw puzzles, so there were some problems for that. Oh, my book next. Oh, well, it's not in print, of course, and like I said, you'll have to go on the internet to the web page and get the download that's there, and you can download it or read it right there, as I understand. Okay, let's see. Loving the minute. Still, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, here's a good one. True Grit. I checked the magnets on my daughter who got both, and it seemed to work. I'm 80 years old and didn't get. It seemed to work on me, so I don't know. Yeah, um, there are placebos out there, just so you know. I can't say much about it, but when you're doing this type of experimentation, they're going to be placebos, so they have a control group, and that's why a lot of these things, not just for identification purposes, but so that they'll know who got the placebo and who didn't. So then they can have that control group, so that's part of that. Void Tech A, can you speak of the plurality spoken in the Old Testament, like when God says we or us many times? Yeah, let us make, yeah. And there's a lot of ongoing arguments on this because, um, the idea of what a polytheistic religion is and what a monotheistic religion is really, there are really some very fine lines, Void Tech 8. Um, you'll be told that, for instance, in the first verse of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim et ha Shemaim et ha Eretz. The Elohim there, they'll say, well, that's the big God, that's the everything. It is in the plural, and I would break it down this way, and I think I did this once before. Um, Jesus said, "Ye are gods, unto whom the word of God comes." That's in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, God tells Moses that he is a God, an Elohim, to Pharaoh. And of course, the name of God that I've explained before is I will be whom I will be. It's not just I am that I am or I exist. The real message is he basically decides who's going to be his mouthpiece, and so that makes it almost a plurality. In other words, there can be many people that speak for God under His authority, um, but they all have the same message. They all have the basic same attributes. In other words, when they become a spoken word of God, when they do that, they have united themselves with the commonality of of God Himself, of His attributes. Not perfectly, of course, but they're unified. As Jesus said, um, I and the Father are one, and then it goes on and it says, help them to be one with us. And even though those are in the Gospels, they go along pretty much with the concepts that uh, really bind the ancient Israelite religion and make it a different religion than the other religions. So again, uh, it talks about basically a single essence, but that there are, and that's really a simplistic term, but for the sake of the time that we have here, and that those who can align themselves with it then become part of that. That's the monotheistic side, and I could get into tons of arguments with the Jews on that, and even Christians. But on the other side, you have the polytheistic religions, and then in those you'll notice you have things like uh, Poseidon and Hades and um, uh, Jupiter, Mercury. All these are gods, names of gods, and they all have different functions. You see what I'm saying? In other words, one is in control of the sea, one's in control of the air, one's in control of the earth, one's in control of the thunder and the storms. You see what I'm saying? Those are the polytheistic religions. One's in charge of the crops, one's in charge of the rain, one's in charge of the river Nile. You get the idea. That's not the case in Israelite religion. It's one God with many attributes, and he places those attributes out, but it's all for the same purpose. They're all one. They're all doing it for the same reason. That sounds like I'm cutting it like it's a fine line. It's a hair's difference, but it's really worlds of difference between the old polytheistic religions and the religion of the Israelites. And by the way, I had somebody point out to me, and it's true, the Israelites did involve themselves in human sacrifice, but it was when they did that God got them in trouble. uh, and told them that they were worshiping false gods. And in Isaiah talks about passing their children through the fires of Molech and taking them into the caves beneath the rocks where they would sacrifice them. And that was all looked down upon by God. It wasn't sanctioned by Him at all. So just so you know, yes, the Israelites did it, but they did it in disobedience. Okay, just so you know. All right. D.B. Ryder, that's a good point. What if God doesn't come to save us? Well, the promise is, if you believe the scriptures, that it will happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen in the way that you want it to. I think that's the important part. As I pointed out the other day, and I pointed out in my book and in my other explanations of things, the Jamesian community thought that the war to end all evil was going to happen at their time. And it did end, but not the way they thought, and most of them were killed or enslaved or had to flee. Um, so it's going to happen, and that's really what the delay of the parousia is all about, is that there are some other things that are happening, and I don't anticipate that there is going to be a supernatural, for lack of a better term, a supernatural event. For instance, the coming in the clouds of glory, meeting Christ in the clouds, and all of that stuff, that's all misunderstood. And I've explained it before, and it hurts a lot of people's feelings. And I notice a lot of people are dropping off. Not that it matters to me, because I'm going to speak what I understand to be the truth of the matter, regardless of who wants to hear it. But, I don't want to hurt their feelings, but they don't understand what was going on in the first century, and the whole idea of the clouds of heaven and the eschatological reign and all of that has to do partially with your eyes. Oh, yeah, your eyes being opened, and I mentioned that the other day with the word for punishment, um, and I think it probably confused some people. Uh, it's not the same opening of the eye or the single eye that the Luciferians have, the all-seeing eye. That's not what it means. It means the opening of the eyes, like Jesus said, the blind will see. The unstopping of the ears, they will hear. Adam in the Garden of Eden, when he was told to awaken, open his eyes, and he looks upon Eve. It's the idea of being able to see. So the clouds, this coming in the clouds of heaven, with the Son of Man on the right hand of glory, those are all uh, allegorical images, uh, and they don't necessarily mean what they're currently interpreted to mean. Uh, for instance, I've talked a lot about Malachi 4, where it talks about Shemesh being the son, not the son of God, which would be Bane, but Shemesh, which is the son. But it does have a dual meaning because depending upon the vowels in the word Shemesh, it's translated as son, the sun in the sky. But it could also mean a person who sets the example. It could mean something like that too. So, how is it going to work out in the end? I don't know. What's important is not to wait for somebody to save you. What's important is that you do all you can, and that you do righteousness, even if you're the only person to do it, and you love God, which is piety. So those are the things that you need to do. Don't. I mean, it would be nice if somebody comes down and sets up a kingdom and all that, but this world is a school, and as I explained one day, just like when you were in high school, you were in 10th grade at one point, you graduated and left, and then somebody else came in and did the same thing in their 10th grade, and it goes on and on like that for years. Well, that's what this place here is. It's a school, so I don't see it ending in the way that most people anticipate it. Okay, and that's probably not a very good explanation, but I guess what I'm coming down to is I would hope that maybe God will step in and we will know who he is, and there are scriptures that indicate that he will go before us and he will live amongst us. But I'm not certain what that actually means. I think you have to be careful of looking for somebody who is going to solve your problems for you. Nothing wrong with praying, nothing wrong with looking forward to guidance from God, but it's like I said the other day, everybody wants to talk to God. The real question is, who does God want to talk to? And those are usually the ones he calls his sons. Okay, just so you know. That wasn't a very good answer to your question, but it's about as good as I can do tonight. Yeah, American Defender, you're right. You're here quite a bit. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to go there tonight, but you know how I feel about that. Apollyon, yeah, Apollyon is a real problem. Of course, it's the same thing as the evil one, and of course Trump is very much into Apollo and all of that. So there are ties in with that. Yeah, then I like that. Putting it together too. It is my understanding there will be several places of refuge. The main place will be where he will be when the trial ceases. Yeah, and I've discussed that same thing, putting together. My personal belief is that that will happen. The way the New Testament talks about, and when you read it, is that the tares are gathered out of the wheat. The tares are gathered out first, put into bundles, and then burned, and that the wheat is saved, and they are put in the barn basically for safekeeping. So I think there will be a place. How that comes about, I am not sure. It could be very similar to the way the Israelites responded to Moses. There could be a latter day Moses, so to speak. But I look forward to a place of refuge where, and I've said that. And remember, it says, when you see the abomination of when you see the abomination of desolation as spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand ye in the holy place. Well, holy just means separate. In other words, separating yourself, just like the Qumranian community separated themselves from the Romans and from the Herodians and all of that. That's the same kind of thing. So you separate yourself, and you can't get out completely, but you do the best you can. And hopefully there will be a place where all of us like-minded people can gather one of these days. But we're going to need something with some pretty significant protection because we'll definitely be a target for the evil ones, right? Yeah, that's right. And Thomas Jefferson's right about that. A rally of over 100,000 will have a tactical nuke dropped on them. Yeah, and I agree with that. So that's why I say if there is finally a place, it's going to have to be under an authority that can protect those people. So until that occurs, it's best to stay in smaller groups, dispersed. I've talked about it before, decentralization with small groups of people, and don't do what I do. Don't speak out too much because then the groups, the people that you associate with, become pe- persons of interest, so to speak, by those who have evil intents. Um, Illuminati. Oh, I can't say I've read Connor McDarry's Irish Wisdom. I think I've heard about it, preserved in the Bible and the pyramids. I think you may have heard. I can't say I have his concepts. I may have heard about before. I can't say I've heard of him, but you do know that I've explained that the pyramids, uh, what a pyramid is in Greek and Egyptian, is the same thing that is Bethlehem. Bethlehem means house of the wheaten cake. Pyramid means house of the wheaten cake. So there is a tie-in to the Egyptians and the Israelites, and particularly the whole first century situation. Thank you, Roosevelt, for putting that up there. I appreciate it. Everybody. Roosevelt put up a link to the website where you can get the book and read it. And some people disagree with me on this. Maybe it's because I'm too close to it, but I don't consider it a page burner. Um, it starts off on a very scholarly, I think, discussion of what the book is going to be about and what it is based upon. And then I try to shift into a novel format, and I'm not a novelist. Um, Professor Eisenman was very kind and said that I had done the world a favor by putting out this story in a fictionalized romance, because that's really what the first century history has been, is fictionalized romance for 2,000 years. So a good way to fix it is to write it so people find it interesting. Fictionalized romance, use basic historical information and then try to get the real message out. But it's not a page burner in my estimation. But yeah, you can get it for sure. Yeah, as Roosevelt has published, posted it there. Yeah, I agree, Watchman. God picks his spokesman, not the seminaries. Exactly. Exactly. Who picked Moses? Not Pharaoh. Definitely not. Uh, Now, there is an order involved, and when I say order, I mean, you've got to be able to know the difference between hearing voices and knowing that God's talking to you. And there are some very specific things that happens when God's talking to you that are not going to happen uh, with voices coming across the AI, or hearing voices in your head or things like that. Some other very specific things happen, and when they happen, there won't be any doubt in your mind. Of course, some people have had the lower, these other voices in their heads, and they're certain that they've gotten the right message. Um, that's where we have some accountability, and we have to be humble, not prideful, and we have to look at it as a calling and a responsibility, not a dictatorship. Okay, so yeah, but yeah, you're absolutely right. God picks them, not the seminaries. You're welcome, DB Ryder. You're very welcome. I don't do the best at this, but I try the best I can. Okay. Oh, here's an interesting one. Feel good. I had a near death experience in 2007. No vision, but much foresight now. My life has turned out so much better for you. I've heard about that from a lot of people that have had those experiences. There is definitely something else going on besides here. And what's most important is our relationships. Our relationships are what are important. Almost nothing else is. Principle, doing righteousness. Yeah, but outside of that, our relationships are really the most important. God speaks and uses scriptures 100% guaranteed. John McNerney. Yeah, that's true. But even Paul, when he was writing there, he said you must rightly be able to rightly divide the word of God. And Paul said, if any man teaches a gospel other than he had preaches, let him be accursed. Well, as I have already pointed out, Paul was preaching a gospel that was contrary to Jesus' brother James, who Jesus left in charge, not Peter. But even if he had left Peter in charge, Paul was usurping things. So the Scripture still has things in it that are methods of men, and you need to be aware of that. And I know people don't; they want to think it's the infallible Word of God, and there's not one mistake in it. Well, I could sit here, and I'm not going to, but I could give a class on all of the contradictions and all of the misinterpretations and mistranslations. Not all of them, lots of them. There's so many of them, I couldn't do all of them, but we could spend quite some time talking about some of these mistakes. For instance, in Acts, it talks about in Matthew too. It talks about a scripture and it quotes Jeremiah, and it's not from Jeremiah; it's from Zechariah, and that's his one mistake. And there's just so many others. And then in the translations, uh, the way they've been translated, that there are so many mistakes there, which is why I tell people that they need to get a Strong's, a Hebrew Greek linear Bible, and a Gesenius, so that and even those aren't exactly positively 100% right. Uh, you have to look at the context. You have to understand the ancient culture, um, the, the times that they were in, and what was going on to understand what's being said. You can't just lift a scripture out of a verse out of any scripture and apply it to you and say that that's exactly how it's going to happen. Now, that's called exegesis, a type of exegesis, and it's very common in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I've mentioned the Habakkuk Pesher, I've mentioned the Isaiah Pesher, the Daniel Pesher, and all those Peshers are exegesis or explanations of how those scriptures and those verses apply to those people. That you do, but it doesn't mean that it's going to come out the same way. All right, you're applying the principles, not necessarily the exact situation. Okay, if that makes any sense. I do not look at the scriptures, and if you don't know this by now, you haven't been paying attention. I do not look at either the Old or the New Testament as the infallible Word of God. I do not. Uh, there's been too much interpretation, um, people's self interests, organizations' self interests, and there's just no way to say that it is. And people will say, well, you don't have much faith in God because God could protect His holy word so that it would never be damaged. Well, if that were the case, why are we arguing about it? Okay? So it's not true. It's not true at all. Yeah, I think that's right, Roosevelt. God speaks in other ways as well. And what'd you say there? Such as when you pray for His aid in making a decision. Exactly. And as I've explained before, God's answer to you, you can get a yes, and that will be self evident, or you can get no answer at all, or a no. And no answer at all is a no, and no is a perfectly good answer, even if we don't like it. Yeah, that's right, Phil Good. The most valuable thing in this world is our relationships with one another. Absolutely right. Two great commandments: love the Lord thy God, love thy neighbor as thyself. There they are, right there. There they are, right there. And even though Jesus said that, that's all through the Old Testament too. It's in Torah, and most people will understand that anyway. Yeah. Okay. Illuminati. I don't want to go entirely there tonight. What I want to tell you is that the name Stephen is the Greek name, the Greek word for crown. This is gonna be a problem because when it talks about Stephen mentioning to the Pharisees before they stone him, uh, This is an overwrite. The stoning of Stephen didn't happen. It is an overwrite of the stoning of James. And James was known to wear a diadem as the high priest of Israel, the opposition high priest. So he wore a crown and a diadem as the opposition high priest against Ananias of his day, who was the high priest, Herodian high priest in the temple, even though they knew each other. And James went into the Holy Holies once a year at a very minimum and did the high priest's ordinances on Yom Kippur and maybe some other times too. But he was known both in Josephus and by Epiphanius and by Irenaeus and by a lot of those early historians. And Josephus says that he wore the diadem of the high priest. So, in other words, what's really happening there is that James is being stoned, and the words that Stephen is uttering, this character Stephen is, oh, I see the glory of God in the clouds, and the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of God, right? And then he expires. Well, those words of Stephen are the exact same words that are quoted to him in both Josephus and the Talmud. So really, the star that we're talking about, you got to look at it from the point of view that that stoning of Stephen was actually the stoning of James. And Eisenman does a really good job in explaining that. So I'm going to leave it at that, and you should go check it out. If you get James, the brother of Jesus, he explains that really well in there, and also in the New Testament code. And you can read it in Josephus. Josephus, it's in the Antiquities. You can read right there where it talks about James wearing the diadem, the crown. So when it says that Stephen was crowned, they're saying that the crowned high priest was stoned. And that's really what that history is about. That's why I say the New Testament has these anachronisms and these blatant errors, because they're trying to tell a story so that you can understand some principles. And then you get characters like Paul in there who have an underlying mission to destroy the Messianic movement in the first century and to turn it into a Greco-Roman mystery religion. And he was very successful at it, obviously. Yeah, okay. Guy Trunkett. What is John 1:1? In the beginning was the Word. The book of John is the outlier in the Gospels. The synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are very similar. There's still some significant differences, but the synoptics are called the synoptics because they're very similar. Synonyms, very, very similar. There's a very good possibility that they were either written from another manuscript that we have yet to find, called the Q document, and Eisenman would disagree with that to some extent. But the point is that those gospels were written with information that was obtained from Josephus, from legends, even some, I guess I could say, for instance, Asclepius, one of the Greek gods who was the god of healing. A lot of these things were put together along with the many Messiah claimants of the first century, and I've named a couple: Judas of Sepphoris, Athronges, etc. In my book, I talked about that. So, in John 1:1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And then I tell you, I've explained when Jesus said, "Well, then ye are gods unto whom the Word of God comes." Well, there's that word again. Well, the word that John is referring to, and there would be scholars that would disagree with this, um, but they need to study some of the esoteric things of the early Israelites, including those of the first century, the Jews. Um, the the word that's actually being identified there is, you have Bereshit, Bra, Elohim, Et. right next to the word Elohim is the definitive et, Alpha Tav, which you would know in the Greek as Alpha and Omega. So Jesus is identifying himself in Revelation as that letter, that word, et, which is the Alpha and Omega in Greek. So Aleph Tav in Hebrew, et, is the Alpha and Omega in Greek. So what it's saying is that it's not even really saying that Jesus is the logos idea of the Greeks, because that's a Hellenization of Hebraic thought, which doesn't work. You can't do that, even though they've tried and they've been very successful. What it's really referring to is what I talked about earlier in this video. It's talking about, and I showed it on the board the other night with how it relates to the word emet, which means truth. In other words, everything. It's the beginning and the end. It's the beginning and the end and everything in between. So we're all really part of that et. Uh, and if you look at it from the point of view of, of the letter of James, not Pauline, again, if you're coming here to hear me expound upon and pat the self-appointed Apostle Paul on the back, you're not going to get it. Okay, you're just not going to get it. I know too much of the history, and it's too obvious what's happened even in the scriptures, and I've explained that on several occasions. But if you look at the Jamesian side of things, and you understand that you become a son of God when you perform righteousness and love God, and at all perils. And it explains that even Jesus himself came to that. In Hebrews, if you read the book of Hebrews, I think it's in chapter 3, I might be mistaken about that, but it talks about that he became the Son of God because of the things he suffered. He became the Son of God on the day that God said he had performed the righteousness that was necessary. On this day, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, is kind of a short explanation, but when you look at other parts of the scripture, it says, God actually says, on this day have I begotten thee. Not that you were something before, but on this day have I made you a son. On this day have I begotten you, and you are my son. So even in that situation, there were things that had to be done, and that was really the argument between Paul and James. And the word, the concept of John 1:1 definitely comes into play there. Uh, and again, it plays off what I've talked about even in this video already, where Jesus said, "Ye are gods, and to whom the word of God comes." God calling Moses a god to Pharaoh, and the concept of what's called the primal Adam. It's also known as the Adam Kadmon in Jewish thought, in esoteric thought. But it has to do with some things that Christians would find out are very similar in some regards to some New Age concepts. But they'll it's not that the New Age concepts are New Age. It's that they've taken some of those earlier understandings of the ancient belief systems and taken them to themselves, and they're misunderstood. Now, a lot of these New Age things have been expanded to the point of real question and maybe even absurdity, but the New Testament even has some absurdity in it, and so does the Old Testament. Again, if you don't understand the culture, the language, and the history of the times, you're going to misunderstand when you make the translations and the interpretations. So anyway, that's a long explanation. John 1:1 is talking about the Word. The Word is et, which is right next to, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and it's Bereshit bara Elohim et. So the Elohim et are right together. So that's what John's saying, that in the beginning, Bereshit, in the beginning, just like it says in Genesis, was the Word et, and the Word was with God. It's right next to the word Elohim. And if you know Hebrew, you can go look at that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. How did they know Jesus was born? Well, don't forget you're reading a story that was written after the fact. All right. Um, Ms. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series, she's writing a story. It didn't happen, but are you going to believe it happened because one of Harry Potter's friends said that he had a magic wand and was able to turn a bird into a human being because one of the other characters in the story that was written said so? I saw a comment the other day, and this is nothing, this isn't attacking the person, it's just showing the problem where you can't use a primary witness, someone that claims to be a primary witness, to witness for themselves. You can't do that. That's called hearsay. Okay, you can't do that. Well, it's not really hearsay, but you get my point. In other words, if you ask me where was I on the 16th of May, and I say, well, I was in Anchorage, Alaska. That doesn't mean I was in Anchorage, Alaska. So when the story writers say that 500 people saw Jesus resurrected, okay, well, somebody said that 500 people saw Jesus resurrected. Where are their written testimonies to that fact? There are none. You see what I'm saying? So you can't use the story to verify itself. That's circular reasoning. So that would go with your question as well. So how did they know Jesus was born? Well, if you're talking about the stars, yeah, the signs in the heavens and the signs of the times, yeah, it is written in this in into the constellations and in the movement of the planets because man can't mess with those, but a man can mess with the interpretation of those events, and that has happened. They're helping me out by turning the light on here. Happy free content. Roy, have you traced your genealogy back very far? Do you think you or any of us might be actual Jesus descendants? Wow. I will say that there is no doubt in my mind that there are people alive today that were that are descendants of the man that you would know as Jesus. And I've explained why, even though Eisenman was saying that this Jesus person would have been very similar to James, if not the same. And I don't want to get into that, but uh, there are some questions that James, for instance, his celibacy, uh, for reasons that I've talked about in the past, was in fact a cover story. There is a possibility that James claims to celibacy were a cover story to protect his hidden posterity, and the same would go for Jesus. Although in Jesus' situation, they just wanted to destroy any possibility he had posterity because they were heirs to the throne of King David. So the Romans were intent on destroying that genealogy. So I'm answering your question in a roundabout way. I do not believe that Jesus was celibate. He could not have been sat on the throne of David, or claimed to, or even the messianic, the Messiah ben Joseph, and remained without a wife. The high priest, and this is another problem for James, as a matter of fact, which I bring up quite a bit. Uh, the high priest, when they went into the Holy of Holies, had to have their wife close by, because if they didn't, he would not be in the image of God, which is male and female, and would have been summarily punished. So there's something going on with James that we are not aware of in the written history, but that would only make sense. There are historical documents, and this includes the Dead Sea Scrolls, that talk about certain things being hidden. For instance, there's an individual by the name of Hanan the Hidden. Well, why is it hidden? Well, because somebody will try to kill them or their or their posterity, for one reason. Okay, just as one example. Uh, so in Jesus' situation, My understanding is, and I've seen my genealogy all the way back, on my father's line, um, it goes all the way back into the second century BC. In my mother's line, it stops in the 1600s or 1500s. Um, but definitely in my father's line, there is at least with the information that's available at this point in time, and this, Bibles have been burned, which is how they kept their genealogies, for centuries, in the Bible, that kind of thing. Um, Libraries have been burned. The Jewish Babylonian captivity, a lot of their genealogical records were lost, and people that claim to be of certain tribes really aren't. It's just by tradition or because they want to be. But as far as I've been able to tell on my father's side, we do go back, and the question is who is the mother? Uh, and the mother that is presented in most of these situations was by the name of Mary, Miriam. Uh, it's suspected, Eisenman would totally disregard this because the Mary Magdalene that comes into the New Testament Gospels, along with Martha, are presented in the Talmud as being the daughters of very rich men, and these women were very selfish and very materialistic. And that comes from the Talmud, but Robert Eisenman would be one of the first to say that the Talmud itself can't always be trusted, that sometimes there's hyperbole and deliberate name calling and defamation in there. And he recognizes that, so that I appreciate that. My take on it is that they were out to destroy the good names of Jesus and his family. That's my take on it. Even James, they had some nasty things to say about James as well. So my take is that all those things about Mary Magdalene, Martha, Lazarus, Nicodemus, Joseph of Arimathea, et cetera, that are found in, and even Honi the circle drawer that Eisenman gets into. The deleterious, I'm sorry, the insults in there are exactly that, and I think it is to take uh, the royal holy family and desecrate it and minimize it. Uh, Otherwise, why spend so much time on it, trying to do it? The whole thing, and I don't want to get into a whole lot of detail there because it really can get detailed, but it has to do with the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, the famine relief during the war with Rome or right before it. It has to do with the whole idea of taking the Messianic movement and crushing it. You got to remember that when the Romans allowed Rabbi Zacchaeus to live, and that Zacchaeus called Vespasian the Messiah from Judea to rule the whole world, that he basically sold himself and betrayed his own people. And the Romans rewarded him by giving him a synagogue, and at the Council of Yavna, he created Rabbinic Judaism, out of which the Talmud came. So it's all designed to discredit the family of Jesus and the four brothers that are mentioned in the New Testament: Joseph, James, Judas, and Cephas. So with that long background, I have genealogical information that goes back to Jesus, yes, and I think a lot of you do too. Some of it's probably inaccurate, and I recognize that. By their fruits you will know them. By their fruits you will know them. Happy free content. Are the Jews of today the original Jews of Jesus' time? Did the Romans kill all the Essenes? Very good question. Very good question. No, they did not kill all the Essenes. They wanted to. A lot of them escaped in the Pella flight, which Dr. Eisenman talks about, and it's in Josephus as well, and in some other histories. It's my firm belief that the Masada situation was not a suicide. It did not end in a mass suicide. I think they got away, and the Roman commanders there could not admit it because the emperor wouldn't have permitted it. probably had cut their heads off, so they had to come up with a storyline that they all committed suicide. I don't think that happened. Archaeology doesn't really verify that. So I say that either there was a secret way out, because the Romans had a siege wall built all the way around Masada, where a lot of the Essenes apparently and the Sicarii went. And I've explained that in videos in the past in case you're not quite up to date. But that siege wall, there was no escaping from Masada, at least not an ordinary means. So either they had one heck of an extensive tunnel system, which I think the Romans would have found once they got up on Masada, or there was a miraculous event that took place. And I know people are going to say, well, Roy, you talk about natural things. You don't want to get into the supernatural. Well, sometimes things happen. You just can't explain it any other way. And if Jesus actually was not a composite individual or actually just a rewrite of James, which is very possible, and he promised that he was going to come back to people in that generation, then it's very possible, I think, that he did something to save the people in Masada the same way that Enoch is talked about being taken by God and walking with God. And he became Metatron according to Jewish tradition. So are the Jews the same today as back then? No. There are, then that gets into some really deep discussions that are really hard to cover at this point in time. But even in Jesus' day, and even James, it's even talked about in Josephus, there were Herodians who converted to Judaism, but they weren't really converts. They weren't really Jews. They weren't Jews at all. And yet a lot of them survived. A lot of the Herodians took part in the revolt against Rome, in the Jewish war, the war against Rome, but a lot of them didn't. And they were what we would call, loyalists today, or, from our revolution, they'd been called Tories. And they stayed with Rome, and the majority of them were of that ilk, at least in the nobility classes. And most of the DNA that they have of the people of that period that they know were Jews, or that they say are Jews, when they take that DNA and they test and they say, oh, it's like the Jews today. Well, if you take the DNA of a Herodian, a born Herodian, who is an Edomite Arab, and you compare it with the people that are ruling Israel and Saudi Arabia today, you're going to find that the DNA is similar. And so they'll say, see, that's proof that today's Jews are real Jews. But it's not, because they came from an illegal conversion of the Herodians, so they're not really Jews by blood. And again, it really comes down to, by their fruits you shall know them. That's what I use more than anything else. By their fruits you shall know them. If if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Well, and it goes on the good side too. Well, if a person tries to be righteous, if they try to deal with their fellow man in a righteous manner, if they love God and they love their neighbor, they're probably good stock. And that's even more important than any pronouncement of faith they might make, because Jesus and God are more concerned about what's written in your heart and mind than even if you know their names. And if you are righteous enough and God notices you because of your righteousness, he'll make himself known to you at some point. So anyway, the point is no, not everybody who says they're a Jew today is a Jew. As a matter of fact, the Palestinians are probably more Israelite than the Jews that are in control of Israel, the state of Israel right now. Okay. Yeah, and Talmudic Jews are a whole nother. Remember, it's like I told you, the Romans were the ones that controlled rabbinic Judaism, just the way they controlled extant traditional Christianity, under Constantine. And even earlier than that, the Romans were in control of that whole thing, and those who didn't bow the knee to the Roman dictates were slaughtered, which is what happened in the Bar Kokhba rebellion of 135 A.D. Okay? Rome has influenced our present-day thinking and everything about us in ways that most people just have no concept. Okay, we've been going for an hour. I've answered a few things, not as many as I'd like. Uh, I guess just so you know where I am on this, okay? I have a lot of respect for James. His real name was Yaakov or Jacob. There are some interesting problems with him. When I say problems, there are some interesting questions with James or Yaakov, Jacob, and what he was actually about in the first century. We have a lot of historical information about him that we don't have about his brother Jesus. And I don't want to get into some other forensic historical methodology that I could explain the connection there. But what I would say is this: I would not have, I would not, and maybe this is an indictment of sorts, but I would not have been a close follower of the Jamesian community in Qumran, in the Essenes community. I would not. Um, I think, in my personal opinion, that there was, if Jesus existed as I think he did, as my book explains, I think that there was a disagreement with Jesus and James, unlike Dr. Eisenman would say, and that Jesus would say that James had gone too far, and the Qumranian community, the Messianic movement, while it was correct in its basic assumptions, in its belief system, they set up too many stakes, just like the Herodian Pharisees did and the Maccabean Pharisees had done. Uh, I would not have taken kindly. I wouldn't have joined the group. I probably would have taken a Nazarite vow for a short period of time, like you can do. You can do it for a day. You can do it for 3 months. You can do it for 3 years. You can do it for 30 years. You can do it for your life. I may have taken a short Nazarite vow to learn what I could, but their interpretation of Leviticus, for instance, and how far they took it, uh, was, in my estimation, um, incorrect. And they believed that there was going to be a holy war. And as I told you, they had two possible paths: that their Messiah could kill all the Romans, or the other path would be the Romans kill their Messiah. And the way it turned out, it was the second. The Romans killed their Messiah. But what it really comes down to is, uh, did 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 what they think was going to happen? Um, did their holiness and purity in the camps? They didn't allow women and young boys in those camps. Not that there weren't women Essenes, there were, but they weren't allowed in the wilderness camps where the holy army of the sons of light were gathering. It had to be all men. Um, Probably, I don't know the exact age range, but it would be at least 13 and older, and probably probably older than that, 16 and older. But uh, they didn't allow women in there because, of course, with their periodic menstrual cycles, they didn't want to be exposed to the blood. And young boys, for a very similar reason, which I won't get into. Um, because when the men had a little problem, they could go into the mikveh and wash off. Well, that shows, in my estimation, kind of like a phobia, a disregard for the way God created us. And although there were stipulations in Leviticus about purity with menstrual cycles and nighttime emissions and things like that, they were ceremonial uh, only for ceremonial restrictions, and they could be ameliorated by a purity of just going into washing your clothes, taking a bath, and remaining in a clean state until the evening, and then after that, the next day you can partake in the ceremony. Well, the people in Qumran went too far, in my estimation, and I would not have been a part of that. However, I would not have been a Paul and gone in there and pretended to be, and I've experienced this in my life already, different church groups, things like that. I don't go in there dictating to them what they have to do, that they have to bend their rules to me. If I don't agree with the rules, I leave. But that's not what Paul did. Paul went in and he was trying to force a change, trying to force James and those people, those men in particular, to take uh, uh, people into their society that weren't willing or able to abide by the rules. So Paul was an invader, a trespasser, a mean-spirited guy who thought more of himself than he. It's like I said, he's an apostle in his own mind. He's a legend in his own mind. I have no respect for Paul, and the good things he did say were basically rewordings or a comeback on sayings of James, and you see that all through the New Testament. I don't know if I answered your question very well. The margarita is getting to me. What do you think of that sunset? Look at that blue sky. Isn't that something? Pretty, isn't it? Well, again, deplorable. You're quoting from the story. Okay, what's the second witness? You're quoting, and I respect you, deplorable. You know I do. But again, it goes back to somebody wrote the story. Where's the second witness that can verify the story in the Gospels? There aren't any. What, you're going to have Matthew verify Luke and Mark? Well, like I said, those were probably taken from another single document called the Q document, or at least there are some other indications that they were written in some kind of collusion with others. You can't use the internal information from the New Testament to prove the New Testament. You can't do it. It's like I said a few minutes ago, the person that said that, there were 500 people that witnessed the resurrected Christ. Well, that was written into the story. Where are their testimonies? They're not there. Well, the same thing goes with this thing about Judas. The fact of the matter is that Judas, the one that you know as Judas Iscariot, was also known as Thaddeus. He was also known as Judas Didymus Thomas, and he tried to help the people to escape the Romans. And he was captured by the Romans and beheaded under orders of the emperor. He didn't betray anybody, and that's in my book as well. He was framed by the town, well, not even the Talmud. He was framed by people who wanted to tell the story to deprecate the Jewish messianic movement, and particularly James and his followers. So don't use the New Testament to verify the New Testament. You go into history, Judas was beheaded by under orders of the emperor. That's what happened to him. I'm not in Utah, deplorable. I'm not in Utah. Remember, I said I was going on a road trip. I'm working with some people, doing some things, but I do get to enjoy this wonderful place here with these beautiful skies. Yeah, I do. Yeah, it does match the shirt. And again, I didn't do this on purpose. It's because it got pretty hot today, and this shirt's very breathable. So yeah, rightly dividing the word of truth. That's right, Ephesians 2. Exactly, exactly. And that's a lot. People take that for granted. You use the words to interpret the words, and it's um, and I've talked about that before. Like when I did that breakdown of the word emet the other night, or the word for punishment, right? Um, anash, And I have something else about that that I've got to look up when I get a hold of my Hebrew lexicon and dictionary again. But there's another secret there, and I kind of alluded to it that night, and I might give a little dissertation on that here in the near future. That's good flyover entertainment. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that. Absolutely. All right. Yeah, okay. I like this. Band zero. Religion is self interpreted. You can only believe your own experience. You can't be judgmental about people because they don't have your experience. You have to believe your own experience. Now, if somebody else gives you a testimony, if somebody else gives you a witness testimony, you need to consider it. Yeah, but are you under some requirement to obey it, to make it your own? No, no. What you are required to do is to investigate before you condemn, because condemnation before investigation is just stupid. So the idea is that when these people tell you these things, you don't mock them. But you can examine it. But too often, especially in Christian circles or in those who are religious zealots, if you don't agree with them, then they take offense and they say that you're not going to be saved because you don't do it the way that they say you need to. Um, so it's a personal experience. If you're an honest person, if you believe your own experience, if you take into consideration what other people have had happen to them and you investigate it, whether you accept it or not, if you're honest about it, God's going to do the rest for you. Because if you have integrity, if you have honesty, if you really want to know the truth, you will get that at some point in time. It might not happen now. It might not happen tomorrow. You might have to have a lifetime of experiences before God finally says, okay, here's the rest of the story, kind of like Paul Harvey. It's your intent. Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Conduct yourself with righteousness and love of God. Oh, Bethany. Hi. How you doing, Bethany? I hope things are going better for you and Shepherd. I know he got canceled there on a lot of several of his platforms, I guess. And I've been too busy to get back with you guys, and I apologize. It's just the way it is. Bethany Adonai is a co-host with Shepherd Ambulis of IntelliHub. Oh, very good. Jed Bradley. Usually you have to play everything more than once just to grasp some of it. Exactly. Which is why teachers a good teacher will try to give you, um, they will try to get you at least three of the five senses, right? Um, they'll try to show you something that you can see. They'll tell you something that you can hear, and then they'll also try to give you something you can feel, taste, or smell. That's what a good teacher will do, because the more of those senses that you engage, the more likely the student is going to learn. So a good teacher will again try to do more than one sense. So it goes along exactly with what Jed Bradley here, that you have to play everything more than once. Redundancy is another way of learning. Memorization, redundancy. You hear something. That's why there's all this propaganda going on right now. Even though it's false, even though it's a lie, they repeat it and they repeat it and they repeat it and they repeat it, and then finally, what? You accept it, even if it means cognitive dissonance or normalcy bias. You'll finally accept it because you've heard it so long. It takes a very strong, powerfully minded person to not be subject to that. But if you want to learn something, yes, you have to experience it more than once to really get the gist of it. But you're in control of that. Again, it's believing your own experience. Okay. Well, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. Hopefully, I've done a little better tonight than I've done in the past, that we've had some good discussions. Oh, that's interesting. Emergency Exit is asking me, would you ever cover Robert Eisenman's book in a video, maybe an interesting chapter in one of his books or a topic that you think we should know? Yeah, I've actually thought about doing that because I think his work was seminal and far reaching and almost visionary. So I'll do that. At some like when I read my book, I won't read one of his whole books. I mean, we're talking, 7, 800, 900, 1,000, 1,100 pages. I wouldn't do that. But yeah, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll take a chapter or maybe a section that might be of interest. I'll do that emergency exit. I'm not sure when. I want to pick a subject that is going to be of interest and will spark your desire to find out more. But I'll do that emergency exit. Thank you for that. Oh yes, you know about Sukkot. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Oh, I would love Cheryl Pruitt. I would love to interview him. However, uh, he was doing interviews up until about 5 years ago. Um, I had lost his number. It's a long story, but I made a mistake and I destroyed some information and I just didn't take the time to get it again, which I could have if I'd used a little. You know how it is in life. You go about doing things and then things kind of slip away, especially old friends. And I'm afraid I did with that with Professor Eisenman, much to my detriment. Uh, so I put out a tweet to him some time ago, uh, asking him to DM me, which he did not do. But then I finally did find his phone number that I had lost. I hadn't been able to find it, and then I did find it. Just to give you the background information, Cheryl, so you know why I'm probably not going to interview him. And uh, let me just say that something has happened to Professor Eisenman. Okay, I don't know what. It's possible that I might hear from one of his children, who I didn't know, by the way, but I think they know of me. So I might hear from them, but I think Professor Eisenman has had an injury. So I don't think he's doing any more interviews. Okay, Cheryl, I would love to. As a matter of fact, I think because of how much I know, I mean, he was basically my mentor. So, to be able to interview him would be great, but I just don't think he's up to it. Okay, so I apologize for that. But he's a very, very kind, generous man. But yeah, and Roosevelt's saying the same thing. Do some videos in Eisenman works, and a lot of what I talk about is based on his studies anyway. And I didn't just run with him because he was the easiest, or the first one I ran onto. That's not the case at all. He's the one that seemed to make the most sense to me. I mean, I studied the others, Strugnell, uh, Giza Vermes, all of that. And when Eisenman's works came out, uh, I could see in my own estimation, and people would say that I'm wrong about this, but his presentation, his detail, his common sense approach to all of that is really the basis for what I talked about. Again, I have some disagreements. I don't think Jesus was exactly like James, if there was a Jesus. And I know that gets people upset, but you'd have to understand why I say that. Because you also know that I believe that despite what Dr. David Price would say about the Shroud of Turin, by the way, I knew Dr. Price too many years ago, if any of you know who Dr. Robert Price is. Um, who, by the way, he doesn't believe Jesus ever did exist, which is not Eisenman's position. Eisenman is just looking at it in a slightly different way, more the way I would. But uh, Dr. Price is vehemently against any idea that that Jesus ever existed, or that the Shroud of Turin is what I believe it to be. And the reason why I believe it to be is because I heard Dr. Price explain why he thinks that the Shroud of Turin is nonsense, and yet the explanations that he gave were all the reasons that I've already been able to counter. So just. But again, it's believing your own experience. Do I dislike Dr. Price? No, not at all. Dr. Price has done a world of good for everybody, but um, I don't see the efficacy nor the sound foundation in Dr. Price's approach like I did in Dr. Eisenman's. Okay, is that put well enough for everybody that you know what I'm saying here? So in other words, um, even though I would have some disagreements on Professor Eisenman's positions, I think that overall he has the most accurate, both historically and with his application of ancient Israel and the situation in the first, second, and the third centuries, and even the fourth. He's been able to tie a lot of that together. Never make mine 99. Never, never, ever. Yeah. I've done one or two videos on the Shroud of Turin, and they're in the religious section here on my channel. If you go to religious uh, video studies, I forget what I call it, religious and history series or something like that, you'll see where I've talked about the Shroud several times. Not in the detail, you know, that I could with all the science and all that, but uh, my evaluation of it all is definitely there. Felicia, are you? Am I seeing? No, as a matter of fact, no, Felicia, I'm not. Let me see here. Let me see if I can see. Felicia Lockhart from the Lockhart perspective is asking if I'm seeing, and I'm not. That's weird. As a matter of fact, Felicia, just so you know, I did see one of yours, and it said it had been removed. Oh, here we go. I found one now here. Oh, okay. Hi, Felicia, by the way. I didn't mean to ignore you. I did see one before this one. She's asking me, will you please clarify one point in your statement surrounding your genealogy? It leads to the Messiah. I don't have to clarify it. I'll just tell you, yeah, on my father's side, on the Potter side, it goes, the genealogy has been done all the way back to Jesus. Is that accurate? I can't swear to the accuracy of it, but I can tell you that the genealogy goes back, and the father of my line is Jesus. Yeah, of my father's line. Does that clarify it, Felicia? Yeah. Again, I don't know I can't prove it. I mean, the genealogies, you go back even, well, it's like my mom's line, for instance. That's a good example. My mom's line, I remember her telling me that we came, uh, my family, her ancestor came over on the Mayflower, and I went, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. I can't find it. Well, guess what? It turns out they did. So, genealogy isn't an exact science, and people will make, for instance, the Jews today will say, I'm from the tribe of Judah. Well, they don't know that. They trace it back to some things back to the Herodian period, if they can even do that, which they usually can't. So, I can't without a doubt say that that's the case, but the genealogy does say that. Yeah, it does, and that's why I have a lot of respect for the Templars. Somebody said, "Well, the Templars were always Masons." No, they weren't. They were commissioned by the Pope to do their work, and they became what were considered Masons because they found some genealogical records during their excavations in Jerusalem, which is why I talked about the Holy Blood, Holy Grail, when they realized that the Holy Grail wasn't the chalice; it was the royal bloodline of Jesus, James, Judas, and Kepha, the four brothers. That's what they found. So, considering that, Jacques de Molay was a Templar who, by the way, and I talked about that in a video some time ago. He was basically tortured and executed um, falsely. He was, and there, Catholics in particular will not like me saying that, but that's just the fact of the matter. Um, the Templars did stand up against the Pope finally because they felt like the Pope had betrayed them and betrayed the truth. That's their experience. And in my studies of the history, I would have to go along with that. So, at any rate, it was from the information that they uncovered, apparently, that made it into some genealogical records. And for that reason, mine goes back to Jesus. It does. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I talked about it the other day. I said, Jesus was given, the person we know as Jesus, however he was actually known in his time. He was actually given a form of the Abrahamic covenant that his posterity would go to eternal generations, and I talked about that. And then I put up a video, and I said, Isaiah asked the question, and when he makes a sacrifice for sin, uh, who shall, and he sees a seed, who shall declare his generation? And I said, I will. I'll declare his generation. I just did it again. But the Templars became Masons later, right? I think that was a cover story, Roosevelt. A lot of them, you got to understand what happened to the Templars. The Templars were scattered when they were finally, and they did wrong things, and I covered this in a video some time ago where, money can corrupt. And the Templars, with the knowledge that they had, they were able to say to the Pope and others probably, I don't think they did it openly, but they did it through their banking system. They're really the reason why we have the banking system that we have today. So if there were Masons in that time period, they certainly would have at some point, probably, I would say, after uh, the attack by the Pope and the King of France when they executed de Molay, I would think that there was probably a change at that point where they became power hungry and money hungry. I'll be right in. I'm almost done. They're telling me there's some more margaritas. So if they weren't Masons before, okay, because they were commissioned and knighted by the Pope. They were Catholics, but when they found the evidence in Jerusalem, they realized they had been had, and they did pretend to be. They still pretended to be loyal to the Pope and Catholicism, but they realized that if they didn't, they'd be killed, and so they started to do the banking system and all that other stuff. But the problem was, as I said in that one video, the money and their ability to was like it was like um, uh, the Rothschilds. I forget their original name right offhand. This is starting to get to me now, and they're rushing me. But uh, uh, whatever the names of the Rothschilds were, yeah, I don't know why I'm forgetting their name right now, but he was saying that I care not who makes the laws of a country if I control their currency. Well, that was exactly the situation that the Templars finally found themselves in. They didn't care who ruled the country because they could control the banking system. Amschel, thank you very much. No way again. I appreciate that. Yeah, Meyer Rothschild. Well, Rothschild was a name they took. It was yeah. But anyway, yeah. Thank you very much. Um, so money corrupts, and a lot of money corrupts absolutely, just like power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the Templars did apparently make some type of an alliance with the Masonic movement, but probably not until the ones that were left that were still secret. It probably didn't really get solidified until probably the 1700s, and now it's all messed up. Okay. Well, hopefully I've given you some things to think about tonight. Sorry I missed your questions there, Felicia. My mouth gets going and I don't see things the way I should because I'm thinking about answering a question. So I apologize for that. But again, I'm not patting myself on the back. It's nothing I did. It's just situation of birth, I guess you'd say. Okay. All right. Well, all right, guys. I'm going to go. You can see it's getting dark here, and I've been asked to come on in and join my friends again. So I'm going to do that. Thank you for coming. Um, believe your own experience, but be honest about it. Seek, thirst, and hunger for the truth and for righteousness. And you'll make mistakes, but if you're honest with yourself, you'll get your answers. Sometimes they hurt. Sometimes you have to rearrange your thinking, and that's not an easy thing to do. But it's not saying, again, as I said at the beginning of my book, I'm not denigrating what Jesus did. I'm just pointing out that it's not. He didn't do it the way we've been led to believe. That he was in a Jewish, Hebraic, Israelite culture, not a Roman Greco culture. That's exactly what he was against, was the Roman Greco Greek culture. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you next time, okay? Out here.